Hey, it is June 9th, just a little bit past 12 p.m. Yeah, like 12:05 p.m. or something like that. Yeah, it's pretty hot out, as it has been the past like 2 or 3 weeks or whatever. But the past like week, it's been like more humid, mixed. It's been like a higher percentage humid mixed with the hot, so it's been like a very almost like a tropical kind of hotness or whatever you want to say, like super humid. Um, but yeah, I was thinking of recording this inside, but I just said, screw it, I don't know. So I was like, all right, just nut up and take a walk in the relatively scorching heat, I guess. Screw it. But the main topic of this video is a response to Post Nostalgos, Rudy, one of his most recent videos, which was about it was how, I guess, Japanese culture and cats, at least that's some of the stuff he went over, but a lot of it about how Japanese culture differs to Western culture, I guess you could say, or I mean, Japanese culture is, at this point, it has been westernized, but it is definitely different in many ways. Like if you went to Japan and you went to the UK or the US, it is a much different experience, at least from the on the surface level. But he was talking. That was the main topic of that video, pretty much, and how Japan is more seems to be more like civilized, kind of, than the Western culture in the U.S. and stuff like that. And I'm fairly intrigued by the Japanese culture and all that as well. So I felt like I had some differing opinions based on what I've observed and a few people I've talked, or at least one person I've talked to that actually like lives there. So I felt like I had my own opinions that I might as well add to this. But I wrote some notes for this just because it would have been hard to keep this all somewhat concise and organized or whatever if I was just doing it off memory and all that while I'm talking. But yeah, the first topic I can remember without looking at my notes was oh yeah, and these topics kind of go similar to how your video, Rudy, brought up the topics, but I think near the end of my notes, it kind of goes off of what the video was talking about, like it kind of goes past that sort of, so probably about past point 6 is when it's kind of not so much a direct response to your video, in a way, those topics that get brought up, I guess. But yeah, this first one you mentioned, you're watching another guy's video, which was basically how, I guess they have these, or these things have been more, popularized, or they've been used more, or whatever, these, delivery robots, like full, I don't know how you'd call that, fully autonomous delivery robot sort of things, where they have no human driver or whatever. They go to their destination, drop their thing off, the person picks it up, and then they go back automatically. But how they had these things in Japan, and they were treating them very like nicely and respectfully and all that stuff. No, at least as far as you could see, that was presented. Nobody like breaking the robots, vandalizing them, trying to steal from them, whatever, that kind of shit. But then you show the not counter, but the comparison where in the U.S. in U.S. cities, people are stealing them, vandalizing them, kicking them over, just disrespecting them, that kind of shit. Trying to steal their packages and all that, break into them, whatever. And you know, the kind of point being tried to make there is that, you know, people in the U.S. are much more brutal. Not so much brutal, but like much more violent or disrespectful of property and other people's property and shit like that. And I think the guy in the video was saying, like, you know, how the U.S. culture is so much less homogenized, which, you know, as you were bringing up the statistics and like the kind of race kind of stuff, numbers and shit like that or whatever, to an extent, as a factor, I guess. But on that, I just wanted to make the point that, just the observation, I guess, that that nobody seemed to bring up, and this is just me, I don't know, this is just how I kind of look at it, like, well, out of many things, but one of the things is that in Japan, I think if anybody has seen kind of the media that is released there, or has been released there for, like, decades and decades, there is generally much more of a, what's the word, a marrying of humans and technology, in a more positive kind of light, whereas in the U.S., that still happens. Like, you obviously have stuff like, you know, the tech buddy tropes, or whatever you want to say, like, you know, Star Wars with Han Solo. Is it Han Solo? I don't know shit about Star Wars, but, you know, Han Solo, I think, or Luke Skywalker, I don't know, whoever has the fucking robots, R2-D2 and C-3PO or whatever, that kind of shit, even cartoons, I'm just remembering off the top of my head, My Life as a Teenage Robot, that kind of shit, more Western cartoons, that one was more modern, technically. Yeah, there's a lot of examples, but I think that's even more, like, significantly more prevalent in Japan, the melding and companionship between technology and humans in Japanese culture than Western U.S. culture kind of thing. Like, you got shit like, even not just necessarily robots, but just like the AI, like, that's not even AI, but you know, the technology, the synthesized things like Hatsune Miku, Vocaloid, whatever you want to say, that kind of shit, major thing. Like, in the U.S., you don't really have that. I mean, you have that actually where these people are, like, not actually really real celebrities or stars or people probably, but, you know, they're just basically fucking things on a screen. But with Hatsune Miku and shit like that, Vocaloid, there is no real, that is embraced, the fact that is like an autonomous, not autonomous, but a synthetic thing. Much more than any of the shit you see in the U.S., much more than any of the shit you see in the U.S., which, yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking of more examples. a fucking million fucking trucks and shit going by today. Awesome, but fuck. You know, in the U.S. shit, you have stuff like Terminator, the negative melding between man, well, not even man, but you know, straight robots technology, the evil, quote unquote, evil parts of it, or negative parts of it. So many other things, but then in Japan you have other shit like, I don't know, Astro Boy, Mega Man, Rockman, whatever, stuff that was made in Japan, IPs and stuff like Rockman. What else? Is Ultraman a robot? I don't know if Ultraman is a robot. He's definitely, I'm pretty sure he's some kind of combination of robot or some shit. Cyborg, who knows? I don't know anything about Ultraman, but so much of their media, so much of stuff with like vending machines even, just like cute robots, technology, stuff like that. So their culture, at least the more modern West, I guess you could say the bastardized version of their culture, if we're not talking about like the feudal Japan shit or whatever, that kind of stories. But the more modern kind of expressions of their culture, you could kind of see that it is a lot of even to some extent fetishization of technology and stuff like that. So I would say, just as one part of it, one aspect, the Japanese treating these delivery robots with more respect, or treating them as something that's more normal, makes sense there. Makes sense there, just because of that. At least that's my view on it. Not saying that's the entire story, obviously. It's just, I think it's a big part that probably that seemed like nobody really brought up or mentioned. That was the main point I wanted to make on that, and I'm gonna have to look at my notes so I can remember what the next point is, so be right back. Okay, so the next point was about the cultural cohesion, or in this case, the lack of cultural cohesion in the U.S., whereas in Japan, there's much more cohesion of the culture, because generally if you went down in a, I don't know if they would be called the same thing, a Japanese suburb or whatever, a Japanese neighborhood, most of the people are going to probably be Japanese, yeah, from Japan, natives, as one might say, natives of the country. Whereas, in comparison, in the U.S., it is, as they like to say, as they like to call it, a melting pot. A melting pot of sorts. I mean, I could just see it in my own neighborhood here in New Jersey. And I'm not going to say Jersey is a good place to take as an example or whatever. Or maybe it is a good example to take of lack of cultural cohesion. Because, yeah, I mean, you go down our neighborhood or our cul-de-sac, whatever, just even our cul-de-sac, you got shit tons of Indians, I don't know, maybe people from the Middle East as well. Being a racist asshole here, I can't really tell the difference there, but Indians, probably Middle Eastern descent, Asians of various descents. I don't know from where, could be Korea, could be Vietnam, could be Japan, could be China, I don't know. You got a few blacks here and there, and a few whites here and there. So it is a very, very diverse mixture of descents, races, and cultures and everything. And at least in my area's case, and maybe it's just because I or my family or whatever were antisocial or some shit like that. I don't know. I kind of think that to an extent sometimes. But I don't know, even just from what I can observe, there is very little interaction between neighbors and people in these areas and stuff. I mean, I don't go down the other neighborhoods to see too much what people are doing or whatever, or how they're interacting, but it seems very similar. Like, there's not much neighborly friendliness or just, like, interaction at all. Maybe that's just a Jersey thing. I don't know. Like, I went to Wisconsin one time a few years ago, and, maybe this is just because the area was near an airline, so it was more of like a tourist kind of place, so that was just kind of as it came. So potentially a biased perspective there. But, people were generally pretty friendly. Compared to New Jersey, at least. Not that people are always, like, unfriendly or whatever, uninteractive with other people or whatever. It's just, you could tell that there is not much interaction between neighbors and such. Now, is this entirely because of cultural differences? I'm sure it has a pretty decent part of it, but I doubt that is the entire story, obviously. But in Japan, I don't know. I haven't been to Japan. I've never been to Japan. All I know is from secondhand sources and third-hand sources, and even further from that. So, I have no first-hand experience with what a general neighborhood or the people are, how they're like in Japan, if they're more neighborly or whatever. I'm kind of guessing not. I feel like most people have become less and less friendly, or at least interaction since the CV shit. Just kind of one of those download things where just everybody's like now less interaction kind of stuff. So I'm guessing it's probably pretty similar, but at the very least, yes, the cultural cohesion, I'm sure, would make it easier, even if there isn't as much of that interaction as there used to be across the board, possibly. And does that lead to more aggression? Yeah, I'm sure it does. The lack of cultural cohesion, I'm sure that does lead to more acts of violence or crime or whatever in certain cases. Especially in those places like just looking at this, like, ant. I don't know what the fuck is going on here. Like, an ant got a spider or some shit. I don't know. But I'm guessing there is less violence because of that. Or there is more violence because of that in the U.S. than in other places, or in Japan specifically, whatever. I might have had more of a point to that, but yeah, I was just giving my perspective that, yeah, in the U.S., it's obviously, quote-unquote, a melting pot, so there is very little cultural cohesion, leading to potentially more crime and violence and stuff like that, but also just people caring about each other less and being less communal. I guess that'd be a good word for it, less communal, less willing to build communities because of that. Okay. Let me see what the next topic is. Okay, so this one I don't know if it goes. I just kind of. I think I put this one down just because I thought about it while I was making the notes, not necessarily because it was a direct response to what you're talking about. But the main point is that Japanese and, let's say, U.S. culture, Western, U.S. Western culture, let's say, seems so different from uh, from a surface level perspective or a surface level view. But from what I've kind of discerned, but this is, once again, this is just from my own observations here, and most of them are, almost basically all of them are at best second-hand observations, not first-hand, obviously. But yeah, like, they seem different, so different on the surface, but then when you kind of back up, the end result is actually basically exactly the same. Like, to me at least, the end result kind of just leads to essentially most people being in a kind of slave class kind of thing, or whatever, like a proles, whatever, as 1984 would call it, a proles group, a slave class working for the slightly smaller and more wealthy slave class in themselves, them working for the overall reality kind of shit, whatever the system is, whatever they're programmed to do, and all that. But that's kind of just how it ends up, I think. In the U.S., you have more, at least, from the U.S. perspective, you have more of a fake idea of, like, freedoms and independence or whatever. Say, like, working for a company. Generally in the U.S., you have the right to work bullshit, quote-unquote right to work, where it's like, or at will, I think that's what it's called, at will employment, where basically you could just leave whenever. Actually, yeah, that's a similar, a funny thing between the European culture and the U.S. culture as well. That the end result is the same, but the surface level is different. Like in Europe, they have these laws or whatever that, like, when you have a contract between an employee and an employer, it's like a binding contract, and you can't really break it early, like either party. So you can't just fire somebody without, like, some notice, and you need to, like, have them working for, like, a few months before that kind of shit. But as well as you can't just leave a job without notice, and, like, you have to give them a few months and shit like that. Whereas in the U.S., it's just basically like you could get fired, and then you could do whatever with unemployment and shit like that, or sue them or something. But you could just leave whenever, basically, for the most part. I'm not saying that's always how it goes, but that's generally how it is. But then in Japan, it is a much different culture where, at least this is what, as I've said, from a at best second level source, or whatever the term is, second level source, that, at least is how the media and stuff portrays it, that in Japan, you get a job, and you basically stay there your whole life, essentially your whole, you get one job, and then you basically plan on staying there your entire life. That becomes your life, that becomes your job, your career. And if you leave or get fired or whatever, that's seen as a big black mark on you. And after a point, like, companies they just talk with each other, and they'll basically say, like, this person, don't hire them and shit like that, and then you'll basically be excommunicated from the society, in a sense, quietly excommunicated from society in that way, after a point, if you were seen as not someone who plays with the program, or goes with the program. But yeah, those all seem so different, but then just kind of at the end result, when you actually look at the end results, they all kind of lead down to the same thing, which is just wage slavery. And I wouldn't say necessarily satisfied wage slavery, like, people that are satisfied depends, but I think in all cases, there's people don't like their jobs. People don't like working in their careers and shit. Generally, except the people that are on like the they're with the program and stuff. Don't necessarily need to call them NPCs, but I'm sure many of them are. But yeah, like the end result of that kind of just leads down to the same thing, and I think I think it goes across the board. Like even the schooling system, same end result. Like basically propagandization, whatever the fuck the word would be, propagandized, brainwashed. They try to take the independence or the independent thought out of you in the school systems and all that. In all systems, I don't think it's just one or the other, all of them. And then the end result is that they hope that you become a good little worker ant in the end. And if you don't, then the society tells you that you're basically fucked. And some they push it more severely than others. Like in Japan, they push it very severely with the school and all that bullshit, whereas in the U.S. it's not nearly as severe, but it's still pretty pushed, pretty hard. I have no idea how it is in the European schools. It's probably very similar to the U.S. in some ways. In most ways, I would imagine. But that was the main point I wanted to make, is that the cultural differences on a surface level seem so much different, but then on the big picture level, the end results, the means, the ends justify the means? Yes, I guess the ends in this case. The ends would be basically exactly the same. Okay, so this one, a lot of it bleeds into what I just said. Not all of it. But once again, the idea of Japanese culture being more civilized, kind of, or whatever, I think it, on the surface, it gives a very good mask of that to an extent. But then when you'd say more civilized, you'd also generally think like better or more effective, productive, at raising people up to thrive, kind of, in their lives. But then, as I've seen from a second-person perspective in many of them, never first person. I'm always going to keep mentioning that. I've never been to Japan, so I don't know for sure any of this shit that I'm talking about. I'm just going by what other people have said, how I've observed it and perceived from what they've said about it. But like, Japanese culture seems to be much more about repressing things, repressing just everything almost, and especially stuff involving the family and stuff. And in that sense, not so much repressing, but hiding and masking dysfunction, making it seem less fucked up than it is. Hiding things behind closed doors sort of deal. But then if you actually went behind those closed doors, it would be like, oh, well, this was just as fucked up, if not more fucked up in some cases than these other cultures, than these other family units and stuff. And that's kind of the main point, is like in the media sense, I think it is hidden a lot more, so it makes outside onlookers think that they're more functional than they really are. Whereas in the U.S. culture, it is much more open about some of those things. I'm saying that it's entirely open, because it's not. I know there's a lot of stuff that gets hidden about families and stuff. But it's not nearly as well hidden, I guess, and a norm to be hiding this stuff as much as possible. But you know, just the as facilitated from the whole school system point or thing, is that the school system in Japan is very severe, and it's seen as extremely important to do well in the school system, or you will be, a social outcast, a failure in all ways and all that stuff. You won't be able to get employed, and then you're fucked. And one of the things that leads into that is the whole, I guess, hikikomori outcome, I guess you could say, for many youth. I don't know if it's many, but it is enough to be talked about, which I guess isn't necessarily an indicator of what percentage is actually afflicted by this phenomenon, if you will, whatever you want to call it, this hikikomori thing, where basically the kid or whoever, usually the son or daughter, I guess in some cases, becomes completely socially isolated, just lock themselves in their room and basically never leave their room, just either consume hedonistic media all the time, all they do is consume, they don't do anything else, and then their family kind of facilitates it because that's how it is that you don't really talk about these things and try to put your dirty clothes out for other people to see. You kind of just hide it and deal with it. So, the parents just kind of acknowledging that it's happening, it's a thing, but kind of just trying to ignore it to an extent and not bring much attention to it. Which kind of just leads to that person being even more socially isolated. Seen as a blemish on their family or society, whatever. But then you also have other things where, like, the second-hand source that I was going by, he was a, that I talked to for at length for one night or whatever. He was a expat to Japan from the UK for work, for his software company that he worked for. And he went to Japan for whatever reason. I guess that was one of the big customers probably. And eventually he decided to move there permanently, I guess. I don't know if they would call it the same thing as a migrant or whatever, but he moved there permanently eventually. But he said, at the beginning, when he was still, and maybe he still goes there, I don't know, but he would go to these places that they would have these, bars, where, it would be basically, gathering places for, I guess, Japanese native people from Japan, as well as lots of expats and immigrants and tourists and stuff like that, I would imagine, people from foreign countries and foreign cultures. And, this is something I'm positive that they have these kind of things in the U.S., obviously, but it probably isn't nearly as necessary because it is such a melting pot in so many ways. But he was going to these places in Japan where it would specifically I don't know if it was specifically that, but that would be one of the things, is that you'd have tourists of different cultures trying to have one-night stands, usually, with Japanese people, native people from Japan, that wanted to get freaky with a foreigner kind of deal. And, that was just always one of those things, is that that's kind of the point I'm trying to make, is that, Japanese men generally in the culture are kind of, not saying all of them, obviously, I'm trying to insult an entire fucking culture of people or whatever, race of people, but, they're generally the Asians are seen as present as much less masculine in their characteristics, the ways they act. They're generally much more passive, and a lot less aggressive or direct, or whatever you want to say, masculine. Traditionally masculine, I guess you could say. They have less body hair, they have less facial hair, they shave it more or whatever. So they're much more clean cut usually. And then people those are nice, whatever those are. But then people, would hook up with these people because they wanted something different. Or they wanted somebody who was actually somewhat masculine in characteristics instead of what they normally had, which was just, whatever. The generic Japanese working man, family man kind of shit. But, kind of the point is, like, they have these places of obvious degenerate behavior, if you want to put it that way. Not traditional conservative behavior, I guess you could say. As well as, maybe this is more down to the guy I talked to. I don't know. But, and I'm sure it is to some extent, but he said that he married a Japanese woman, and at least as of the time I was talking to them, they were having other affairs with other women. I'm not sure if they were all Japanese or what, or if it was just going to those bars still or whatever the fuck. But he was married and he was doing that stuff, and who knows, maybe his wife was doing the same exact thing. I didn't really ask, but that was what I got from it. So yeah, I don't know if that's necessarily anything with the Japanese, but there seems to be quite a bit of somewhat hidden dissatisfaction in the bedroom, apparently, which would say, yeah, it's not exactly conservative leaning in that sense. Shit. Oh, yeah. And he said that when he went to one of those places, he almost got, what do you call that? Catfished? Yeah, I think it would be catfished. He almost got fooled by a Japanese transgender tranny. He was like talking to them. In this case, it was a him talking to him, and he was wondering. He's like, "Wow, this chick is way more interested in like computers and technology than I'm ever used to from any of these other women I've talked to." And then later on, he realized the person told him before they went to the bedroom, "By the way, I'm a dude, or I'm a tranny or whatever." And then he was pretty side. What would you call that? Pretty taken back by that. So, obviously that kind of thing, the transgender cross-dressers and all that shit, that is still penetrated the Japanese culture pretty readily. I don't know if it's nearly as prevalent, but obviously it's there. So yeah, just kind of the point that there's a lot of hidden dysfunction, but it is definitely a lot of hidden dysfunction and degeneracy, or whatever you want to call it, in getting hit by spider webs and shit, and in Japanese culture. It's just you don't really see it that much from the media and the presentations like that. But going from the one person that I talked to, it seems that actually lived in Japan and stuff. All right. Man, I'm getting pretty fucking hot, but next point. Oh, man, fuck. It is hot. But the next point was on the Apple video where they were destroying the various, like, vintage technology and shit like that in it. On that, you were saying that the Japanese commenters and stuff seem to have much more of a pushback towards that. And I would say, as a kind of rebuttal to that, not necessarily that that is wrong, that they respect those kind of the history better and stuff like that, as well as the older times, the times before technology, or whatever, the times before these more modern technologies and shit. They have more respect for that kind of stuff, the culture in general. I would say, like, yeah, I think Japan would be more upset about that generally. At least the people commenting would be more upset about that are from Japan, because I think Japan has much more, a lot more of its identity kind of anchored in in those kind of things that were being destroyed, most likely. I didn't watch and I didn't like look at every reference here, so I'm just kind of going by assumption that a lot of that stuff was brands and shit that had probably originally been made in Japan, like, you know, I don't know, probably Samsung and I don't know, whatever, Toshiba, whatever the fuck. I can't think of all the fucking Japanese company names now or whatever, but I would think that a lot of those things were probably from that country originally. So I think that their identity kind of, and that's always been a thing, that, you know, Japan has the best quality of production for, like, tech stuff and things like that. So I would say, like, yeah, I would think that their culture has much more of that quote-unquote pride, even if none of the people presenting that pride actually did any of that shit, or were involved in it. But I think there's much more of that pride ingrained in their societal makeup or whatever than in, say, the U.S., where, you know, what the fuck? They're going to be putting GM Motors or whatever the fuck, General GE or whatever the fucking bullshit like that. And in the U.S., where these companies are just so fucking obviously fucked up and do evil shit or whatever. Where in Japan, you're kind of just, like, shoehorned into working for them to some extent. And they're seen as, like, such great godly things almost. Oh, man. At least I'm in a little shade, but, man, this fucking humidity is brutal. But, yeah, that's kind of my point with that one, is that I think it's like, yeah, the Japanese are going to be more proud of those things that were being destroyed, probably, because a lot of them were probably from their country originally. And I think overall Japan has more of their societal makeup, DNA, whatever, ingrained within those companies that made that tech and those things and shit, and that pride of doing, you know, making good stuff and all that shit, especially more of that vintage stuff. Like, nowadays everything's pretty much on the same field of shittiness as the others, as each other, to an extent. But yeah, that was just the point I wanted to make there. It's like, yeah, I don't necessarily think that shows, like, more of a necessarily more of a cultural cohesion. I think that's just like, yeah, they're going to be more upset because that's something that is more in their identity than in some other countries where the production of those things is just like whatever, I guess. But maybe that's part of your point, is that, oh yeah, well, they have more cultural pride and shit. I don't have it, you know, I didn't really say this point earlier. I personally don't have, like, any, I know you said that you have some sort of pride for your country and shit like that in the U.S. The way that I see the not milk, or whatever you want to call it, the dark reality, this reality, the screen, whatever. The way you see it, I just see, like, why am I going to have pride for something that all of it is a farce? All of it is a farce at the end of the day. All of it is connected at the end of the day. Birthed from the same diseased womb at the end of the day kind of deal. All right, next point. Okay, so this one, I'm pretty sure kind of goes off of off of the parts that you were talking about. But I wanted to say that from what I've once again observed from my secondhand sources and just from my own observation from the screens, the third hand and even fourth hand, whatever sources and shit like that, that Japan is obviously a much more passive kind of presenting as a much more passive kind of people kind of deal. They're much less expressive, and even their culture kind of sort of teaches them to be more repressed in that way. Like as I said, the more putting on a mask on everything, like the family stuff and all that shit, putting a mask for everything, so and not to wring your dirty laundry out for others to see kind of deal. So they're much more repressed in being able to express their kind of things and emotions, I think. At least when compared to, say, like U.S. Western society kind of deal. And I think this leads to pretty great works of art and media being made and outputted, put out by Japan because of this to an extent. Is like the people are so. This is just me giving my opinion on it, my completely baseless opinion, but I think because of that repression, they express their emotions and how they feel and stuff like that. All this stuff that's been repressed more, and they put it into the art that they work on, the media that they work on, stuff like that. But with that repression, obviously comes a lot of other problems, just on the individual levels. Obviously, kind of the crushing of the individual to an extent, like more, as you said, like it's more of a homogenous thing, but it's more of a hive mind almost. Like the kind of everybody is on the same page to some extent, or they're on the same download and shit like that. So they act very similar. They go by the same kind of. They listen to all these various rules the authorities put out and shit like that. I think that's kind of part of it. Let me look at my notes again. Oh yeah, that was the final point I wanted to kind of make on that. Just once again, just an observation is it's so weird to me, at least in Japan, that anybody who makes like anything. I mean, maybe you could say, maybe somebody could argue that this is how it works for anybody who gets famous for one thing or some shit. But I think in Japan it is like it's a weird phenomenon that any person that is like an artist or some shit that makes something like manga or illustrator or I don't know, whatever, they kind of like in Japan they become known for that thing, and then they kind of their whole life becomes that thing, sort of like. I'll say, a recent example that I would think of obviously would be like Toriyama, which I know he did so many other things and shit like that, but at least to me, end of the day, like he kind of just maybe I'm a fucking asshole for saying this because I'm ignorant for saying this, but it seems like mostly everything that leads back to Dragon Ball to some extent, even stuff like Dragon Quest and all those other things that he's made that have been very super popular in Japan and have like all these fucking long as shit series and all that stuff. Or people like Hideo Kojima with the fucking, I mean, he's not a great example because he's more of a Western kind of fanboy kind of shit or whatever, but the stuff like that, like the people, they get known for like the one thing, and then that just sort of becomes their whole life. Like Toriyama, he fucking did that shit for his whole fucking life. Not, yeah, I mean, I think he did basically, but I know he did other things obviously, but That was kind of the big thing, I guess, that people seem to be most well known for, at least outside of Japan, was stuff like Dragon Ball Z, whatever. And there's other examples, like, you know, just these people that they're like, their whole life just becomes that thing, and they're not even an individual anymore. They just become that thing. They're that artist that did that thing. But I guess it might be unfair to say that as if that's unique, because that's kind of how it works for most of these artists, quote unquote, or whatever you want to say. These people that become famous, shit like that. I didn't mean to put artists in quotes like that, you know, they're not artists or whatever. I'm just saying, like, you know, obviously most of them get pushed by the screen when they get that big. But, yeah, just a weird thing I noticed with that in Japan, at least, that they just kind of, their life becomes that thing. They're not even a person anymore. They're just they're just a thing that made this media franchise kind of deal. And then that's what they do their whole fucking life, and that's it. This one is just an observation on kind of like Asian culture compared, and this is especially, I guess, prevalent, or a thing that was going on with the CV shit. Is you know, even Matt brought it up in one of his videos during that time. What the Asian cultures are much more homogenous or whatever, so they were all like basically following the same script and following the rules of all these things, supposedly going by the screen. You know, I didn't have any first-hand experience, obviously, seeing, you know, people in, like, people in Japanese stores fighting the face diaper shit, the masks, whatever, the Action Jackson Ace and shit like that, I don't know. The mandates, whatever, the curfews. But at least that was what it was presented to us as, which, you know, who knows what they were presenting to them about us in the same way or whatever. But, just from that, it seems like the Japanese kind of culture is, or not even just Japanese culture, but the Asian cultures are much more into bootlicking or kind of following the authorities and shit like that than the U.S., or at least the U.S. Western kind of culture, or whatever you want to say. Which, once again, I guess it comes down to that homogenized culture sort of deal. But, yeah, just something I wanted to bring up that was strange, I thought. Or, you know, it's just a strange observation, which might have some kind of point in this whole thing. But, yeah. And at least my last point on my notes, I just wanted to make a point that from my secondhand experience, secondhand observation from somebody that was living there, an expat, somebody that wasn't native to there, that visited there and then decided to move there. Japan seems like a pretty nice place to like live if you are not Japanese. I think if you are not a part of the native culture, kind of ironically, or maybe it depends on how you feel about being socially isolated or whatever you want to say. I mean, clearly the guy got married, so clearly there's, you know, you don't have to be completely socially isolated just because you're not from there, kind of deal, as a migrant and stuff. But, yeah, it seems like a nice place. The quality of food, products, services, just all those kind of things that involve the wages or whatever. Those all seem of very high quality, though at least on many of those aspects as well, stuff is pretty expensive, I guess, relatively. I guess that's probably not too outlandish for a place that is an island like Hawaii. It's pretty expensive and shit like that. But you know, the quality of stuff is very nice. Probably at least compared to like the U.S. and some other places, but and you know, people are very outwardly civil, but you know, behind closed doors and shit, I'm sure it's probably not the same fucking deal, and I know it is not behind closed doors, but I don't know about the friendliness kind of deal. but I would not want to be born there, and I would not want to be natively Japanese and be living there, because the culture just seems pretty fucked up for somebody like me, who is more of a, I guess you could say, more of the person that is an independent-minded person, even though that might sound ironic to some people, but whatever, with the independent, living with my parents and shit. But I'm independent-minded. That's why I dislike working the wagey job so much, for the most part. I think that's how I go by it, at least. And I know in general, I'm not somebody who goes and follows the leader, or follows, like, whatever. I'm not the best at that. That's for sure. I'm not the best at feigning that. So I would not want to be, at least if I had the same mindset, would not want to be born there, and I would not want to live there as a native Japanese person, because of those reasons, as well as the family pressures that are prevalent there from the school and all that bullshit. So yeah, seems like probably a nice place to visit and maybe even migrate to, but I wouldn't be a place that I would want to be grow up in or whatever. And yeah, the final thing I wanted to say, I guess, is that this will be the outro, is, none of this was an attempt to, like, shit on Japanese culture and try to, like, uplift my own culture and all that. Like I said a little bit earlier, as I have no particular pride or lean towards whatever culture myself, because I just view all of it as leading to the same ends, which I don't generally agree with, the ends, that being, like, the wage slavery and all that shit, the indentured servitude kind of deal. I don't agree with that kind of outcome, at least not for myself. I mean, maybe, if the other people, the other people in the NPCs in society, hey, go ahead, if they want to do that, fine. That makes them satisfied, then sure, but that doesn't work for me. But yeah, I just wanted to make a response to that video that I don't think it's as rose-tinted conservative culture as it might be outwardly seen as. I think it's a lot of stuff, especially to the outside perspectives or whatever. I think a lot of the stuff is kind of hidden behind closed doors to an extent. But yeah, that's all I wanted to say. No, obviously no, like, oh man, this is like such a disagreement or whatever. Just a difference in perspective that I wanted to put out there, out of mutual interest in this topic or whatever. But yeah, it's way too hot. I want to go inside now, so I'll see you later. Thanks for listening.